A dog gives birth to 15 puppies, but when the vet takes a closer look, she realizes they are not dogs at all. At first, it seems like a miracle, an exhausted stray bringing new life into the world. But almost immediately, something feels wrong. Their paws are too big, their cries too sharp, and the truth hiding in their tiny bodies could destroy everything. Suddenly, what started as a simple birth turns into a deadly game of secrets, betrayal, and survival. Forces far more dangerous than anyone imagined are closing in, desperate to claim what should never have existed, and when the ones who want them will stop at nothing, not even fire, threats, or blood, one woman must decide how far she's willing to go to protect the helpless lives in her care. So what are these creatures? And why is someone willing to kill for them? I'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Type it down below, and while you're here, subscribe so you'll always catch the next story. The early morning sun was just beginning to peek through the windows of Buckthorn Veterinary Clinic when Blythe Calder heard the whimpers. She had been restocking supplies, her hands full of gauze rolls, when the sound caught her attention. Dropping the medical supplies onto the nearest counter, she hurried toward the kennels. "Hello," she called out softly, not wanting to startle any of the overnight patients. The whimpering grew louder, more urgent. As she rounded the corner, she found the source, a large honey-brown hound that someone had brought in late last night. The dog was lying on her side, her belly swollen and heaving. "Oh, sweetie," Blythe murmured, quickly unlocking the kennel door. "You're in labor, aren't you?" The dog's eyes, filled with pain and fear, met Blythe's. There was something in that gaze that tugged at her heart, a plea for help, a desperate trust. Blythe knelt beside her, running gentle hands over the distended abdomen. "It's okay, girl. I'm here to help." She glanced at her watch. 6:15 in the morning. Dr. Matthews wouldn't be in for hours, and the morning staff didn't start until 8 o'clock. She was on her own. Blythe quickly gathered supplies, clean towels, surgical gloves, antiseptic solution, and emergency medications. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, even as her mind raced. In her 15 years as a veterinary nurse, she'd assisted with countless births, but something about this one felt different. The dog, whom Blythe decided to call Marigold, inspired by her warm, honey-colored coat, was already pushing. Her powerful body tensed with each contraction, and Blythe could see the first puppy crowning. "That's it, Marigold," she encouraged, positioning herself to help. "You're doing great, sweet girl." The first puppy emerged, and Blythe's trained hands moved quickly to clear its airways and stimulate breathing. But as she cleaned the tiny body, she felt her breath catch. Something wasn't quite right. The pup's paws were unusually large, almost disproportionate to its body. And the coat? It wasn't the soft, fuzzy fur of a newborn puppy. It was different, almost coarse, with an unusual pattern she'd never seen before. Before she could examine it more closely, Marigold's body tensed again. Another puppy was coming. The next 2 hours became a blur of activity. Puppy after puppy emerged, each one requiring immediate attention. Blythe worked tirelessly, her scrubs soaked with sweat, her auburn hair escaping its ponytail to stick to her forehead. She lost count of how many times she wiped her brow with her forearm, careful to keep her gloved hands clean. 7, 8, 9. She counted under her breath, arranging the puppies in a warm, towel-lined box she'd quickly prepared. Each new arrival left her more puzzled than the last. Their cries weren't the typical soft mewling of newborn puppies. They were sharper, more distinct, almost like a different species entirely. Marigold continued to labor, her body trembling with exhaustion. Blythe divided her attention between the mother and the growing number of puppies, checking vital signs, ensuring each one was breathing properly, and helping them find their way to nurse when possible. 10, 11, 12. She continued counting, her voice barely a whisper now. This couldn't be normal. Even for a large breed dog, this many puppies was extraordinary, and each one had those same unusual features, the oversized paws, the strange coat patterns, the peculiar cries. 13, 14. Blythe's hands shook slightly as she cleaned each new arrival. The sun was now fully up, streaming through the clinic windows, illuminating the scene in harsh clarity. She could see every detail of these unusual puppies, and her professional instincts were screaming that something was very, very wrong. Finally, with one last powerful push, the 15th puppy emerged. Marigold collapsed, her sides heaving with exhaustion, but her eyes remained fixed on her puppies. Blythe sat back on her heels, surveying the scene before her. 15 puppies. 15 living, breathing puppies, all with features she'd never seen before in any breed or mix she'd encountered in her years of veterinary work. She pulled off her gloves and ran a hand through her disheveled hair, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. The puppies were huddled together in their box, their strange coats gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Some were darker, some lighter, but all had that same unusual texture and pattern. Their oversized paws twitched as they slept, and occasionally one would let out that sharp, distinctive cry that set them apart from any other. Newborn puppies she'd ever heard. Marigold watched her babies with exhausted devotion, her gentle eyes occasionally meeting Blythe's as if sharing a secret. Blythe reached out to stroke the mother dog's head, noticing for the first time the faint surgical scars on her abdomen. They weren't recent. They'd healed over, but they were definitely there. "What happened to you, sweet girl?" Blythe murmured, her fingers tracing the scars. "And what exactly are these babies of yours?" The morning light continued to strengthen, and Blythe could hear the first sounds of the day shift arriving. Soon, the clinic would be full of staff, and she'd have to explain what had happened. But how could she explain something she didn't understand herself? She quickly checked each puppy again, counting them one more time. 15. All breathing steadily, all warm and seemingly healthy, despite their unusual features. She checked Marigold's vital signs, tired but stable. The immediate crisis was over, but Blythe couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something much bigger. The sound of the front door opening and voices in the reception area broke through her thoughts. Blythe looked down at her scrubs, covered in the evidence of the morning's work, and then back at the puppies. They looked even stranger in the full morning light, their features more pronounced, their differences from normal puppies more obvious. She picked up one of the puppies gently, examining it more closely now that she had a moment to really look. The paw pads were unlike anything she'd seen before, not just larger but differently shaped. The puppy's head structure was subtly wrong for a dog, and even its tiny ears seemed off somehow. This wasn't just a case of unusual breeding or mixed genetics. This was something else entirely. Blythe heard footsteps approaching the kennel area and quickly placed the puppy back with its siblings. She stood up, positioning herself protectively in front of the kennel. Whatever these puppies were, whatever had happened to Marigold, one thing was clear. They needed protection. And right now, she was all they had. Her weathered hands, calloused from years of handling animals, gripped the kennel door as she prepared to face her colleagues. How would she explain what had happened here? How could she make them understand her concerns when she couldn't even fully articulate them herself? The puppies squirmed in their box, their strange cries echoing off the clinic walls. Marigold lifted her head slightly, her eyes meeting Blythe's once more. In that moment, something passed between them. An understanding, a commitment. Whatever these puppies were, wherever they had come from, Blythe would figure it out. She would protect them. She thought of her mother's old farm, now standing empty except for her own modest house at the edge of the property. Maybe that would be a safer place for Marigold and her unusual family, away from too many curious eyes. The thought had barely formed when she heard someone call her name from the hallway. Taking a deep breath, Blythe straightened her shoulders. She'd spent her career being underestimated, seen as just a nurse by some, despite her years of experience and knowledge. But she knew what she'd seen this morning, knew that her instincts were telling her something important. These weren't ordinary puppies, and Marigold's scars weren't from ordinary surgery. The footsteps grew closer, and Blythe did one final check of the puppies. 15 tiny bodies, all breathing, all alive, all decidedly not normal. She'd helped bring them into the world, and now she felt responsible for keeping them safe until she could understand what exactly they were. "Blythe? Are you back here?" The voice was closer now. She looked down at Marigold, who had managed to curl her body protectively around as many of her puppies as she could reach. The dog's eyes were heavy with exhaustion, but there was still that spark of intelligence, that silent plea for help. "I'm here," Blythe called back, her voice steady despite her racing thoughts. "And you're going to want to see this." The morning sun now filled the room completely, highlighting every unusual feature of the puppies, every strange detail that set them apart from normal newborns. There would be no hiding their differences now, no way to pretend this was just another routine birth. Whatever happened next, Blythe knew her world had shifted fundamentally in the past few hours. She stood her ground as her colleague's footsteps approached, her body automatically positioning itself between the kennel and the door. The puppies continued their odd, sharp cries, a chorus of sounds that seemed to echo her own internal warnings. Something wasn't right here, and she was determined to figure out what it was. The early morning sunlight streamed through the windows of the whelping room as Blythe sat beside Marigold, gently stroking the exhausted mother dog's head. 15 tiny pups nursed contentedly, their unusual features even more striking in the clear light of day. Blythe couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was different about these puppies, their oversized paws, the distinctive shape of their muzzles, and those peculiar, high-pitched cries that seemed more wild than domestic. The sound of the clinic's front door opening and quick footsteps in the hallway caught her attention. Dr. Lenora Pritchard appeared in the doorway, her wire-frame glasses slightly askew and her grey-streaked hair escaping from its usual neat bun. The veterinarian's eyes widened as she took in the scene before her. "Good Lord," Dr. Pritchard breathed, stepping closer to examine the puppies. Her professional composure slipped for a moment as she adjusted her glasses. "Blythe, these aren't ordinary puppies." Blythe shifted forward, her heart beginning to race. "What do you mean?" Dr. Pritchard knelt beside the whelping box, her movements careful but urgent. She gently lifted one of the pups, examining it with practiced eyes. The tiny creature squeaked in protest, its oversized paws batting at the air. "These are wild canid hybrids, Doctor," Pritchard said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Wolf hybrids, if I'm not mistaken. And not just any crosses. These appear to be from very specific bloodlines." Blythe felt her stomach drop. "Wolf hybrids? But how?" Before she could finish her question, heavy boots echoed down the hallway. A tall man in worn ranch clothes and a dusty cowboy hat appeared in the doorway, his weathered face set in hard lines. His stance filled the doorframe, deliberately intimidating. "I'm here for the dogs," he announced without preamble, his voice gruff. "All of them. Mr. March sent me to collect his property." Blythe rose to her feet, positioning herself between the man and the whelping box. "Excuse me. Name's Jake Wilson, foreman at the March Ranch," he said, taking a step forward. "Silas March owns that female and her litter. We've been looking for her since she went missing last week." Dr. Pritchard straightened up, her professional demeanor firmly in place. "Mr. Wilson, this dog was brought in as a stray by animal control. There's a proper procedure for claiming ownership." The foreman's jaw tightened. "Mr. March doesn't have time for procedures. That's his breeding stock, and he wants them back now." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. "He's prepared to compensate the clinic generously for any inconvenience." Blythe felt a surge of anger rise in her chest. She looked down at Marigold, who was now curled protectively around her puppies, eyes fixed warily on the stranger. The dog's recent surgical scars were still visible on her abdomen, scars that didn't match with any legitimate breeding procedure. "No," Blythe said firmly, crossing her arms. "This dog shows signs of unauthorized surgical procedures. She's staying right here until we can properly investigate her condition and ensure the safety of both her and her puppies." Wilson's face darkened. "Listen here, Missy. You don't want to make an enemy of Silas March. He's not a man who takes no for an answer. And I'm not someone who can be bullied into ignoring what's right." Blythe shot back, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "If Mr. March wants to claim ownership, he can follow proper channels and provide documentation of legal breeding practices." Dr. Pritchard stepped forward, her presence adding weight to Blythe's stance. "Mr. Wilson, I suggest you inform Mr. March that any further discussion will need to go through our legal department. And you might want to mention that I've already documented the concerning surgical evidence on this animal." The foreman's hand clenched around the envelope. "You're making a big mistake. Both of you." He looked from Blythe to Dr. Pritchard, his eyes cold. "Mr. March will hear about this." "Yes, he will," Blythe agreed, not backing down. "And so will the proper authorities if necessary." Wilson took one last look at the puppies, his expression calculating, before turning on his heel and stalking out. The sound of his boots faded down the hallway, followed by the slam of the front door. Once he was gone, Blythe's legs felt weak. She sank down beside Marigold, who immediately nuzzled her hand as if offering comfort. The puppies continued nursing, unaware of the confrontation that had just taken place. "Blythe," Dr. Pritchard said quietly, "do you understand what you've just done? Silas March practically owns this town. He has friends in every office that matters." "I understand that something very wrong is happening here," Blythe replied, scratching behind Marigold's ears. "These surgical scars, the hybrid pups, none of this is legal, is it?" Dr. Pritchard shook her head slowly. "No, it's not. And if I'm right about these puppies' bloodlines, we're looking at something much bigger than just illegal breeding." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "There are strict regulations about wolf-dog hybrids, especially certain rare bloodlines. The fact that March is involved, it suggests a sophisticated operation." Blythe looked down at Marigold and her pups, feeling a fierce surge of protectiveness. The mother dog had clearly been used without regard for her welfare, subjected to surgical procedures that had left their mark on her body. The puppies, whatever their genetic makeup, were innocent in all of this. "What do we do now?" Blythe asked, her voice firm despite her anxiety. Dr. Pritchard began gathering supplies to properly document everything about Marigold and her puppies. "First, we document everything. Every scar, every unusual feature of the pups, every detail that might be relevant. Then we need to make some careful decisions about who to trust with this information." As they worked to examine and photograph the evidence, Blythe couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. She had taken a stand against someone powerful, someone used to getting his way. But looking at Marigold's trusting eyes and the tiny pups depending on their protection, she knew she couldn't have done anything else. Throughout the morning, they carefully documented everything. Dr. Pritchard's experienced hands moved with precision as she examined each puppy, noting their distinctive features in detailed records. She drew blood samples and took measurements, building a comprehensive file that could stand up to scrutiny. Marigold remained calm through it all, seeming to sense that they were trying to help. She only grew anxious when they handled her puppies, watching with alert eyes until each one was safely returned to her side. "We'll need to keep them under constant supervision." "Doctor," Pritchard said as she labeled the last of the blood samples. "I wouldn't put it past March to try something when we're not here." Blythe nodded, already mentally rearranging her schedule. "I can stay tonight. We can set up a rotation. I'll make some calls." "Doctor," Pritchard added, her expression grave. "There are people who need to know about this, but we'll have to be very careful about who we trust. March has eyes and ears everywhere in Buckthorn." As the morning wore on, both women remained hypervigilant, starting at every sound from the parking lot. But there was also a sense of purpose in their actions, a shared determination to protect Marigold and her unusual litter from whatever forces had brought them to this point. Blythe found herself watching the security cameras frequently, half expecting to see more of March's men arriving. But for now, the clinic remained quiet, giving them time to prepare for whatever would come next. She knew she had just stepped into something much bigger than herself, but looking at Marigold's peaceful face as she nursed her puppies, Blythe couldn't bring herself to regret her decision. The morning sun climbed higher in the sky, casting warm patches of light across the whelping room floor. In one of these bright spots, Marigold dozed while her puppies squirmed and nursed, their little lives now at the center of what promised to be a dangerous confrontation. Blythe sat beside them, her hand resting protectively on Marigold's side, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The sun had long since set over Buckthorn, leaving the veterinary clinic in darkness except for the soft glow of security lights. Blythe sat in the dimly lit treatment room, her eyes fixed on Marigold and her 15 puppies. The mother dog lay contentedly in her whelping box, her honey-brown coat barely visible in the low light as she nursed her unusual litter. Throughout the evening, Blythe had maintained a watchful presence, getting up only for necessary breaks and to do quick perimeter checks of the clinic. Every shadow and unexpected sound made her heart skip a beat. The weight of Doctor. Pritchard's warnings about Silas March's influence hung heavy in her mind. "It's okay, girl," Blythe whispered, reaching down to stroke Marigold's head. The dog's tail thumped softly against the padding of the whelping box. "We're going to keep you and your babies safe." The clock on the wall ticked past 10 o'clock. Outside, a steady rain had begun to fall, drumming against the roof and windows. The sound should have been soothing, but it only added to Blythe's sense of isolation. Every few minutes, she found herself checking her phone, making sure it still had signal in case she needed to call for help. She had just finished recording the puppy's latest vital signs when the first sign of trouble came. The overhead lights flickered once, twice, and then plunged the clinic into total darkness. The sudden loss of power sent Blythe's heart racing. "This isn't right," she muttered, fumbling for her phone's flashlight. The backup generator should have kicked in immediately. It was designed to protect their critical medical equipment. But the familiar hum never came. The security system's alarm began to wail, its piercing sound making Marigold whine anxiously. Blythe's hands shook as she tried to dial Doctor. Pritchard's number, but before she could complete the call, another sound caught her attention, the distinct crackling of flames. Smoke began seeping under the door from the direction of the clinic's reception area. The acrid smell hit Blythe's nostrils, and her training kicked in. She had minutes, maybe seconds, to get everyone out. "Come on, girl," she urged, grabbing the emergency kit she'd prepared earlier. "We need to move fast." Marigold seemed to sense the danger. She stood immediately, allowing Blythe to help gather her puppies. With practiced movements, Blythe began transferring the tiny creatures into the portable incubator she'd kept ready, just in case. Each puppy went in carefully, their unusual features barely visible in the beam of her flashlight. The smoke was getting thicker now, and Blythe could feel the temperature rising. She could hear the fire crackling more intensely, spreading through the building with unnatural speed. This was no accident. Someone had planned this carefully, disabled their safety systems, and started a fire designed to destroy everything inside. 14, 15, Blythe counted breathlessly, making sure every puppy was accounted for. With the portable incubator secure, she clipped a leash to Marigold's collar. The mother dog stayed close to her puppies, her body tense but cooperative. The main exit was already blocked. Blythe could see the orange glow of flames through the smoke beneath the door. That left the clinic's back exit, through the storage area. She grabbed the incubator's handles firmly in one hand, Marigold's leash in the other, and began moving. The smoke was getting thicker with each passing second. Blythe pulled her shirt up over her nose, trying to filter the air as she guided Marigold through the darkened hallway. The dog stayed remarkably calm, trusting Blythe completely despite the chaos around them. They were halfway to the exit when a loud boom shook the building. The force of it nearly knocked Blythe off her feet. Heat bloomed behind them, and she knew without looking that something had exploded. probably accelerants placed to ensure the building's destruction. "Run!" she gasped, abandoning caution for speed. They burst through the storage area, knocking over supplies in their haste. Blythe's lungs burned from the smoke, but she couldn't slow down. The exit was just ahead, its emergency light providing a beacon through the darkness. Another explosion rocked the clinic, closer this time. Blythe could feel the heat of it against her back. With one final surge of desperate energy, she crashed through the exit door, pulling Marigold with her. They tumbled out into the rain-soaked night, just as a blast of heat and flame erupted behind them. The force of the explosion sent them sprawling onto the wet grass. Blythe curled her body around the incubator, protecting the precious puppies inside. Marigold pressed against her side, both of them gasping in the clean, rain-washed air. For several long moments they lay there in the grass, the rain soaking through their fur and clothes. Behind them, flames consumed the clinic, sending orange light dancing across the wet parking lot. Somewhere in the distance, sirens began to wail. Blythe's hands trembled as she checked the incubator. Inside, all 15 puppies were safe, squirming and whimpering but alive. Marigold immediately stuck her nose against the ventilation holes, checking on her babies. As the adrenaline began to fade, Blythe felt a different sensation taking its place. The fear that had driven her through the burning building was crystallizing into something. Harder, something that made her jaw clench and her spine straighten. Someone had just tried to kill them all, to destroy evidence of whatever illegal operation had produced these puppies. The rain continued to fall, but Blythe barely noticed it now. She pulled out her phone, thankfully still working, and dialed Doctor Pritchard's number. As she waited for an answer, she kept one hand on the incubator and the other on Marigold's head. They were alive, but they weren't safe, not by a long shot. The sound of approaching sirens grew louder, and Blythe watched the clinic burn. Everything inside would be destroyed, all their careful documentation, all the evidence they'd gathered. But the most important evidence was right here, alive and protected. Marigold and her 15 unusual puppies. Someone had just shown their hand, revealed how desperate they were to keep their secret hidden. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the scene in stark white light. In that brief moment, Blythe caught sight of a dark vehicle speeding away from the far end of the parking lot. Her suspicions were confirmed. This was no random act of violence. Someone had stayed to make sure the fire did its job, to ensure nothing survived. But they had failed. Blythe drew Marigold closer, feeling the dog's warm, wet fur against her side. The mother dog's presence was steady and calm, despite everything they'd just been through. In the incubator, 15 tiny lives continued to squirm and breathe, defying those who had tried to erase their existence. Fire trucks began pulling into the parking lot, their red lights cutting through the rain and darkness. Blythe knew she would have to talk to the authorities, but her first priority was getting Marigold and the puppies somewhere safe. She couldn't trust that there wouldn't be another attempt. Whoever was behind this clearly had resources and determination. As she sat in the rain, waiting for help to arrive, Blythe's resolve hardened into steel. They had tried to kill these innocent creatures to cover up whatever illegal experiment or breeding program had created them, but in doing so, they had only strengthened her determination to uncover the truth and protect these animals, no matter the cost. The fire continued to rage behind them, but Blythe's focus remained on the precious cargo she'd managed to save. Whatever came next, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She would not let anyone harm Marigold or her puppies. The attempt on their lives had failed, and in its failure it had created something dangerous, a witness who now knew exactly how high the stakes were and who was prepared to fight back. The morning sun cast long shadows across the makeshift shelter where Blythe had taken refuge with Marigold and her 15 unusual puppies. Her clothes still smelled of smoke from the clinic fire, and exhaustion pulled at her bones. But there was no time to rest, not when she heard the crunch of tires on gravel outside. A Green State Wildlife Service truck pulled up, and out stepped a broad-shouldered man in a worn field uniform. His boots were scuffed from years of service, his face weathered by sun and wind. This had to be Officer Rafe Ellsworth, the one person who might have answers about these mysterious pups. "Miss Calder," he called out, adjusting his badge-adorned hat. "I'm Officer Ellsworth. Got your call about some unusual puppies?" Blythe nodded, leading him to where Marigold lay nursing her litter. "I've never seen anything like them," she explained, her voice still hoarse from the smoke. "The size of their paws, the shape of their faces, they're different." Officer Ellsworth crouched down beside the makeshift nest, his expression growing more serious with each pup he examined. He gently lifted one, studying its distinctive features while the tiny creature squirmed in his calloused hands. "How long have you been a vet tech, Ms. Calder?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral. 8 years, Blythe replied. "And I've never seen puppies that look like this." "That's because they're not just puppies." Ellsworth set the pup back with its siblings. "These markings, the ear shape, the distinctive muzzle structure, there's red wolf in these pups. And that creates a very serious situation." Blythe's heart seemed to skip a beat. "Red wolf? But they're endangered." "Exactly." Ellsworth stood, crossing his arms. "And breeding them with domestic dogs is illegal under federal law. If genetic testing confirms what I suspect, that these are red wolf hybrids, the law might require their destruction." "Destruction?" Blythe felt like she'd been punched in the gut. "But they're just babies!" "The law exists to protect the genetic purity of the endangered red wolf species," Ellsworth explained, though his voice carried a note of regret. "Hybrid animals can threaten the survival of pure bloodlines, but there's something else that concerns me here." He walked around the nest, studying Marigold. This wasn't some accident. The markings on these pups are too consistent. Someone's breeding these hybrids deliberately, and that suggests a much bigger problem. "What do you mean?" Blythe asked, though she feared she already knew. "Wildlife smuggling," Ellsworth said grimly. "There's big money in exotic animals and rare breeds. Someone's running an illegal breeding operation, likely selling wolf dog hybrids to private collectors. The fire at your clinic wasn't random. Someone wanted to destroy evidence." Blythe remembered the ranch foreman claiming the pups for Silas March, the threatening way he'd demanded she hand them over. It all started making terrible sense. "How long until we know for sure?" she asked. "About their genetic makeup?" "I'll take blood samples today." "Results usually take about a week." He pulled out his sampling kit. "But Ms. Calder, you need to understand. If these are confirmed hybrids, I'll have no choice under federal law." Blythe watched as he carefully drew blood from each squirming pup, her mind racing. "There has to be another way. We can't just destroy them because of what they are, especially if they're evidence of illegal breeding. Evidence that would be gone once the genetic testing confirms their hybrid status," Ellsworth pointed out. "The law is pretty clear on this. Then we have 1 week," Blythe said firmly. 1 week to find proof of who's behind this breeding operation. If we can prove these pups are evidence in a criminal case, wouldn't that protect them?" Ellsworth paused in his work, studying her face. "You don't give up easily, do you?" "Not when lives are at stake," she replied. "Someone tried to burn down the clinic to get rid of these pups. They're clearly important evidence. There has to be a way to protect them while we investigate." "It's not that simple," Ellsworth warned. "Whoever's behind this has resources." "That fire wasn't amateur work. You could be putting yourself in danger." "I already am in danger," Blythe countered. "Someone tried to kill me last night. At least this way, we might save these pups and stop whoever's behind this." Ellsworth finished collecting his samples, carefully labeling each vial. His expression was troubled as he packed them away. "You understand what you're suggesting? This isn't just about stray dogs anymore. We're talking about federal crimes, endangered species violations, potentially organized wildlife trafficking." "I understand perfectly," Blythe said. "But I also understand that destroying these pups won't solve anything. It won't stop the criminals, it won't protect the red wolves, and it won't serve justice. We need to find the truth. And if the truth leads somewhere dangerous, then at least we tried to do the right thing. Blythe insisted. These pups didn't ask to be born. They didn't choose their genetics. They deserve a chance. And we deserve to know who's breaking the law and putting endangered species at risk. Ellsworth stood silent for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I'll expedite the testing. But Miss Calder, Blythe, you need to be careful. Keep these pups secure. Don't tell anyone where they are. And if you see anything suspicious, call me immediately. He handed her his card with his personal cell number written on the back. I'll start looking into recent wildlife smuggling patterns in the area. Maybe we can find a connection. But remember, if we don't find proof before those test results come back, we'll find it. Blythe said firmly, watching as Marigold gathered her pups closer. We have to. As Ellsworth packed up his gear, Blythe could see the weight of the situation in his movements. He was a man caught between duty and conscience, between the letter of the law and its spirit. One more thing, he said at the door. That fire last night. My colleagues in law enforcement say it was definitely arson. Professional job. Whoever did it knew exactly what they were doing. They were trying to destroy evidence. Blythe said softly. Yes, which means they might try again. His eyes were serious. Watch your back, Ms. Calder, and keep those pups safe. We've got 1 week to unravel this mess before the law forces my hand. After he left, Blythe sat beside Marigold's nest, watching the pups nurse. Their tiny faces seemed so innocent, unaware of the danger hanging over them. She thought about the fire, about Silas March's foreman, about the shadowy world of wildlife smuggling she'd stumbled into. 1 week to save 15 lives. 1 week to uncover a criminal enterprise. 1 week to find justice. She reached down to stroke Marigold's head. We'll figure this out, girl. I promise. The mother dog's eyes met hers with complete trust, and Blythe felt the weight of that promise settle onto her shoulders. These weren't just puppies anymore. They were evidence of something much darker. But they were also living creatures who deserved a chance at life. She wouldn't let them down. No matter what it took, she would find a way to protect them and expose the truth. The clock was ticking, but she was ready for the challenge ahead. Blythe stared at the stack of papers on her desk, her eyes burning from exhaustion. The events of the past few days weighed heavily on her mind. The mysterious puppies, the fire, and now the possibility that these innocent creatures might have to be destroyed. She couldn't let that happen. Taking a deep breath, she picked up her phone and dialed Rafe Ellsworth's number. Wildlife Officer Ellsworth speaking. His gruff voice answered. It's Blythe Calder from Buckthorn Veterinary. I've been thinking about what you said about the puppies, and I want to help investigate. There's more going on here than just illegal breeding. There was a pause on the line. Miss Calder, this isn't some kind of detective story. This is a serious wildlife investigation. Someone tried to burn down the clinic with those puppies inside, Blythe said firmly. I think that makes it pretty serious, don't you? She heard him sigh. Meet me at the coffee shop on Main Street in 30 minutes. We'll talk. The Bell and Brew coffee shop was quiet this early in the morning. Blythe sat at a corner table, warming her hands around a steaming mug of coffee. When Rafe walked in, she noticed he looked different in civilian clothes. Less intimidating, but still carrying that air of authority. I appreciate you meeting me, Blythe said as he sat down with his black coffee. Let's be clear about something. Rafe began, his expression stern. If you're going to help, we do this by the book. No amateur sleuthing, no rushing into dangerous situations. Blythe nodded. I understand, but those puppies need someone on their side, and I'm not backing down. Something in her tone must have convinced him, because his expression softened slightly. Tell me everything you know, from the beginning. As they talked, Doctor. Pritchard burst through the coffee shop door, her usually neat appearance disheveled. She spotted them and hurried over, clutching her tablet computer. Blythe, thank goodness you're here. I found something disturbing. She pulled up a chair, her hands shaking slightly. I was reviewing the clinic's supply orders this morning, and there are dozens of purchases I never authorized. Someone's been using my account credentials. Blythe leaned forward. What kind of supplies? Medical equipment, specialized drugs, things we'd never use in a small-town vet clinic. And the quantities. Dr. Pritchard shook her head. It's been going on for months. Rafe's professional interest was clearly piqued. May I see those records? They spent the next hour going through the supply orders. Blythe's stomach churned as she recognized names of medications and equipment that seemed out of place for their modest clinic. Look at this. Rafe pointed to a series of orders. These are tranquilizers typically used for large wildlife. Why would a small animal vet clinic need so many? We wouldn't, Doctor, Pritchard said firmly. I never ordered these. Someone must have accessed my account. Blythe felt a chill run down her spine. Could this be connected to Marigold's puppies? To Silas March? It's starting to look that way. Rafe admitted. These supplies could definitely be used in an illegal breeding operation. They moved their investigation to the clinic's office, where Dr. Pritchard pulled up more records. The morning stretched into afternoon as they dug deeper, uncovering more suspicious orders, altered delivery addresses, and doctored invoices. The person doing this knew our systems well. Doctor, Pritchard said, her voice tight with anger. They knew exactly how to cover their tracks. Blythe's mind raced through the possibilities. It had to be someone with access to the clinic's computers, someone who knows our procedures. Someone on the inside. Rafe agreed grimly. The realization hit Blythe hard. People she'd worked with, trusted, could be involved in something illegal, something that had nearly got her killed. She thought of all the familiar faces. At the clinic, Tracy the receptionist, who always brought homemade cookies on Fridays, Mark the maintenance man, who'd taught her how to fix the temperamental X-ray machine, even Dr. Wilson, who'd mentored her since she started working there. I feel sick, she admitted. These people are like family. Dr. Pritchard reached across the desk and squeezed her hand. I know, dear. I've worked with some of them for over 15 years, but we have to face facts. Someone here is involved. Rafe was making notes in his small notebook. We need to be careful how we proceed. If we tip our hand too soon, whoever's behind this might destroy evidence, or worse. What do you mean, worse? Blythe asked, though she had a feeling she knew. The fire wasn't an accident. He reminded her. These people have already shown they're willing to go to extreme lengths to cover their tracks. They spent the next few hours creating a detailed timeline of suspicious activities. Dr. Pritchard provided access logs showing when her account had been used, and Rafe cross-referenced them with staff schedules. There's a pattern here, he said, pointing to clusters of after-hours access. Someone's been logging in regularly between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m., usually on Tuesday and Thursday nights. Those are the nights Mark does maintenance, Blythe realized. He has keys to everything. Don't jump to conclusions, Rafe warned, but we'll add it to the list of leads. As they worked, Blythe couldn't help but notice how different Rafe seemed now. His initial gruffness had given way to focused determination, and she found herself admiring his methodical approach to the investigation. What I don't understand, Doctor, Pritchard said, rubbing her tired eyes, is why? Why risk everything for illegal breeding? Money? Rafe answered simply. Red wolf hybrids can sell for thousands of dollars on the black market. Add in the potential for breeding more, and you're looking at serious profit. Blythe thought of Marigold and her puppies, safely hidden away at her house. They're not just dollar signs, they're living creatures. That's why we need to stop this, Rafe agreed. Not just for the laws being broken, but for the animals being exploited. As evening approached, they had compiled enough evidence to show a clear pattern of suspicious activity at the clinic. Someone had been systematically using Dr. Pritchard's credentials to order supplies, alter records, and cover their tracks. I need to report this to my superiors, Rafe said, gathering his notes. This goes beyond simple wildlife violations now. We're looking at fraud, computer crimes, and potentially organized criminal activity. Blythe felt overwhelmed by the scope of what they'd uncovered. Her small-town veterinary clinic had somehow become the center of what appeared to be a sophisticated criminal operation. The thought that people she knew, people she trusted, might be involved made her feel vulnerable and betrayed. "What do we do now?" she asked. "We keep this between us for now," Rafe instructed. "Act normal at work. Don't let on that we know anything. I'll have my team start surveillance on the clinic, especially during those late-night hours." Dr. Pritchard nodded. "I'll monitor my account for any new activity. If they try to place more orders, we'll know immediately." As they prepared to leave, Blythe felt the weight of their discoveries settling on her shoulders. The clinic had always been her safe place, her second home. Now it felt different, filled with shadows and secrets. "Thank you," she said to Rafe, "for taking me seriously, for helping us investigate." He gave her a small smile. "You were right. There is more going on here than just illegal breeding. And those puppies of yours might be the key to unraveling it all. Speaking of which, Doctor," Pritchard added, "we need to check on them. There's still evidence in all this, but there are also patients who need care." Blythe gathered her things, her mind already turning to the 15 precious lives waiting for her at home. Whatever conspiracy they'd stumbled upon, whatever dangers lay ahead, she knew one thing for certain. She would protect those puppies with everything she had. The sun was setting as they left the clinic, casting long shadows across the parking lot. Blythe couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed. The simple world she'd known just days ago, of routine vet visits and ordinary small-town life, had been replaced by something darker and more complex. But as she thought of Marigold's trusting eyes and the tiny puppies depending on her, she knew she couldn't walk away. Someone at the clinic, someone she knew and trusted, was involved in illegal activities that had put lives at risk. The ground beneath her feet might be shifting, but Blythe was determined to stand firm and find the truth, no matter where it led. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the winding country road as Blythe's old pickup truck rumbled along. She'd spent the day checking on various farm animals, trying to maintain some semblance of normal routine despite everything happening with Marigold's puppies. Her mind wandered to their sweet faces, now safely hidden at a temporary shelter Rafe had arranged. Through her rearview mirror, she noticed a black SUV that had been following her for the past 15 minutes. At first, she tried to dismiss it as paranoia, but each turn she made, the vehicle stayed steady behind her. Her heart began to race as she gripped the steering wheel tighter. "Stay calm," she whispered to herself. "Maybe they're just heading the same way." But when she deliberately took a wrong turn down Old Miller Road, a back route she rarely used, the SUV followed. The peaceful countryside suddenly felt menacing. Trees crowded close to the narrow road, their branches creating dark tunnels of shadow. Her hands trembled as she reached for her phone, quickly dialing Rafe's number. "Rafe," she said as soon as he picked up, trying to keep her voice steady. "I think I'm being followed." Black SUV, tinted windows. "I'm on Old Miller Road heading east." "I'm nearby," Rafe replied, his voice sharp with concern. "Keep driving. Don't stop. I'm on my way." The SUV suddenly accelerated, closing the gap between them. Blythe's breath caught in her throat as it pulled alongside her truck. The passenger window rolled down, revealing a man wearing dark sunglasses. She recognized him as one of the men who'd come to claim the puppies that first day. "Pull over, Miss Calder," he called out, his voice carrying a threat beneath its false politeness. "Mr. March just wants to have a friendly chat." Blythe pressed harder on the accelerator, her old truck protesting with a grinding sound. "Leave me alone," she shouted, though her window remained firmly closed. The SUV swerved closer, metal scraping against metal. Blythe fought to keep control as her truck shuddered. Just then, the welcome sound of sirens filled the air. Through her mirror, she saw Rafe's official vehicle approaching fast, lights flashing. The SUV's driver must have seen it too because he suddenly yanked the wheel, cutting across her front end in a dangerous maneuver. Blythe slammed on her brakes, her truck sliding on the loose gravel. For one terrifying moment, she thought she would crash, but somehow she maintained control. The SUV accelerated away, but Rafe was already in pursuit. His vehicle roared past her, and she pulled over, watching as both vehicles disappeared around a bend. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely put the truck in park. Minutes that felt like hours passed before Rafe's vehicle reappeared. He pulled up beside her, jumping out almost before his car had stopped moving. "Are you okay?" he asked, yanking her door open. His face was flushed with anger and exertion. Blythe nodded, though she didn't feel okay at all. "Did you catch them?" "They crashed trying to take a turn too fast," Rafe said, his expression grim. "Driver and passenger fled into the woods, but they left something interesting behind." He gestured for her to follow him. A quarter-mile down the road, the black SUV sat tilted in a ditch, its front end crumpled against a tree. Rafe led her to the back of the vehicle, where the impact had popped open the trunk. Inside was a large metal crate, its lid partially dislodged. "Look at this," Rafe said, carefully lifting the lid. Inside were rows of neatly packaged microchips, each bearing official-looking labels. "What are they?" Blythe asked, peering closer. "Counterfeit tracking chips," Rafe explained, his voice tight with anger. "The kind used to identify animals. But these are fakes, high-quality ones. This is how they're doing it, how they're moving illegal animals across state lines without detection." Blythe felt sick to her stomach. "You mean, yes, this is proof that Silas March isn't just breeding those wolf hybrids. He's running an organized trafficking operation. These chips would let them transport endangered species with fake documentation. The puppies were just the tip of the iceberg." Rafe pulled out his phone and started making calls, his voice clipped and professional as he requested backup and forensic teams. Blythe stood there, trying to process what they'd discovered. The danger wasn't just to Marigold and her puppies anymore. This was something much bigger and more sinister. "We need to get you somewhere safe," Rafe said after finishing his calls. "These people are serious criminals, Blythe. They're not going to stop just because we found this. I can't just hide," Blythe protested. "Those puppies need me." "And what about all the other animals they're trafficking?" Rafe's expression softened slightly. "I'm not suggesting you hide. But we need to be smart about this. These people are organized and ruthless. What happened today proves they're willing to use violence." The sound of approaching vehicles made them both turn. 2 police cars and an unmarked vehicle were coming down the road, lights flashing. "That's the forensics team," Rafe explained. "They'll document everything, and this evidence will help build a case against March and his operation." As they watched the law enforcement teams begin their work, Blythe couldn't shake the chill that had settled over her. The peaceful world of her veterinary practice seemed very far away now. She'd stumbled into something dark and dangerous, but there was no turning back. Those puppies, and who knew how many other animals, needed someone to stand up for them. "I'll take you back to your truck," Rafe said gently. "And then we need to talk about next steps. This isn't just about protecting the puppies anymore. We're dealing with an organized criminal enterprise." Blythe nodded, following him back to his vehicle. The late afternoon sun had dipped lower, casting everything in deep golden light. It should have been beautiful, but all she could think about was how quickly her world had changed. The threat wasn't abstract anymore, it was very real and very dangerous. As they drove back to her truck, Blythe's mind raced with questions. How deep did this operation go? How many animals had suffered because of Silas March's greed? And most importantly, how could they stop it? One thing was certain. She wasn't backing down. No matter how dangerous things got, she would see this through. For Marigold, for the puppies, and for all the other animals caught in this cruel trafficking ring. She glanced at Rafe's determined profile and knew she wasn't in this fight alone. The discovery of the counterfeit microchips was just the beginning. Now they had proof of what they were dealing with, but that knowledge came with its own dangers. Silas March's network was fully mobilized against them, and they would have to be very careful about their next moves. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the temporary shelter where Blythe had relocated Marigold and her puppies. As she conducted her daily checkup on the new mother, something caught her eye. Blythe's hands, gentle and experienced from years of veterinary work, moved carefully over Marigold's abdomen. "What's this, sweet girl?" she murmured, parting the honey-brown fur. There, almost hidden beneath the soft coat, were thin white lines. Surgical scars. Blythe's heart began to race. These weren't the typical spay surgery marks she was used to seeing. These scars were different, precise, professional, and relatively recent. She'd seen similar marks before, but only in specialized veterinary procedures. "Dr. Pritchard!" she called out, her voice trembling slightly. "Could you come look at this?" The older veterinarian hurried over, her face lined with concern. "When Blythe pointed out the scars, Doctor." Pritchard's expression changed from worry to shock. "These are implantation scars." "Doctor," Pritchard said quietly, her fingers tracing the marks. Marigold wasn't naturally pregnant. She was surgically implanted with embryos. Blythe felt the room spin slightly as the implications hit her. "You mean someone deliberately put those wolf hybrid embryos inside her? Used her as a surrogate?" Dr. Pritchard nodded grimly. "This is sophisticated work. It would require proper surgical facilities, specialized equipment." Her voice trailed off as she examined the scars more closely. "The supply orders," Blythe whispered, the pieces falling into place. "The equipment that was ordered under your credentials, it wasn't just for tracking chips, was it?" "No," Dr. Pritchard replied, her face pale. "These are the kinds of tools and supplies you'd need for embryo transfer procedures. Someone was using my access to order everything they needed to run an illegal breeding operation." Blythe sat back on her heels, looking at Marigold's gentle face. The dog gazed back at her with trusting eyes, completely unaware of how she'd been used. "They're laundering red wolf embryos," Blythe said, the horror of it dawning on her. "Using stray dogs as surrogates to carry endangered species offspring. That's why the puppies look the way they do. It's brilliant in its terrible way." "Doctor," Pritchard admitted, "using strays means no one asks questions when they turn up pregnant. And with fake tracking chips, they can move the puppies wherever they want." Blythe stood up abruptly, anger coursing through her. "This is your clinic, Doctor." "Pritchard, your credentials. How could this happen without you knowing?" The older woman flinched at the accusation in Blythe's voice. "I didn't know," she said softly. "But I think I know who did." She sank into a nearby chair, looking suddenly old and tired. "My ex-husband, Cobb. He had access to all my passwords, my accounts. Even after we separated, I never thought to change them. He works in medical supply. He would know exactly what to order, how to cover his tracks." "Cobb?" Blythe remembered the man. Quiet, always in the background when he visited the clinic. "He's working with Silas March. It makes sense now." "Doctor," Pritchard said, her voice breaking slightly. "The late-night calls he'd get, the sudden business trips. I thought he was having an affair, but this—" She gestured helplessly at Marigold. "This is so much worse." Blythe's mind was racing. The circle of enemies was tightening, but at least now they knew who they were dealing with. Silas March, the mastermind. Cobb, the supplier. How many others were involved? Marigold whimpered softly, drawing Blythe's attention back to her. The dog had shifted position to check on her puppies, her maternal instincts undiminished despite the cruel way she'd been used. Blythe knelt beside her again, stroking her soft fur. "I'm so sorry, girl," she whispered. "You didn't ask for any of this. But we're going to make it right." Dr. Pritchard had pulled out her phone. "I'm calling Rafe," she said firmly. "He needs to know about this, and I'm going to give him everything I have on Cobb. Phone numbers, addresses, everything. It's time to shut this operation down." As Dr. Pritchard made her call, Blythe continued examining Marigold, looking for any other signs of surgical intervention. The scars told a story of clinical precision, but moral bankruptcy. How many other strays had been used this way? How many had survived the procedures? The puppies squirmed and squeaked in their bed, their features now making terrible sense. They weren't accidents or strange mutations. They were deliberately created, part of a calculated scheme to profit from endangered species. Rafe arrived within the hour, his face grim as they showed him the evidence. He photographed Marigold's scars and took detailed notes as doctor. Pritchard explained about Cobb's access to her credentials. "This is exactly what we needed," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Proof of how they're doing it. Between this and the fake tracking chips, we can start building a real case." Blythe watched as Marigold tenderly nosed each of her puppies, checking them over. Despite everything that had been done to her, her gentle nature remained intact. She was a victim in all this, but she had become something more, living proof of the operation's cruelty and sophistication. "What happens now?" Blythe asked, looking between Rafe and Doctor. Pritchard, "Now we move carefully," Rafe replied. "We know their method, we know key players, but operations like this usually have deeper roots than we first suspect. We need to be strategic about how we proceed." Dr. Pritchard nodded, her professional composure returning despite her obvious distress. "I'll give you everything I have on Cobb, his patterns, his contacts. He never thought I was paying attention, but I was. I just didn't understand what I was seeing until now." Blythe felt a strange mix of emotions: anger at the betrayal, determination to see justice done, and a renewed sense of purpose. The truth about Marigold's puppies might be horrifying, but at least now they knew what they were fighting against. The sun had climbed higher in the sky, casting warm light over Marigold and her puppies. Despite the darkness they'd uncovered, Blythe found hope in the simple scene before her. A mother's love, surviving against all odds. They would protect her, and in doing so, maybe they could protect others from sharing her fate. Blythe's hands trembled slightly as she unlocked the heavy wooden doors to her mother's old storm cellar. The hinges creaked in protest, unused for years since her mother's passing. The earthen smell of the underground space brought back childhood memories of seeking shelter from storms, but today it would serve a different purpose. "Easy now, Marigold," she whispered, guiding the mother dog down the concrete steps. The 15 puppies, now bigger and more active, were being carefully carried down in padded bins by Rafe and Doctor. Pritchard, the cellar was surprisingly spacious, with sturdy shelving along the walls and a generator her father had installed years ago. Blythe had spent the morning cleaning it out, laying fresh blankets, and setting up heating lamps to keep the puppies warm. "It's not fancy," she said apologetically, "but it's secure. Mom always said this place could withstand anything, even a tornado." "It's perfect," Rafe assured her, setting down his bin of pups. "Off the grid, no paper trail, and those doors could stop a battering ram. Plus, the location is ideal. Close enough to keep an eye on them, but far enough from town to avoid suspicion." Dr. Pritchard nodded as she arranged the puppies in their makeshift den. "The ventilation is good too. Your mother thought of everything when she had this built." Marigold seemed to approve as well, immediately settling into the nest of blankets and gathering her babies close. Blythe felt a wave of gratitude. Her mother's foresight was still protecting those in need, even now. "All right," Rafe said, pulling out his phone. "Now that they're secure, let's go over the operation plan. The intel from Dr. Pritchard's ex-husband's activities shows a pattern. There's a livestock transfer scheduled for tomorrow night." They gathered around a small folding table Blythe had set up, looking at the maps and documents Rafe spread out. The plan was taking shape, a carefully orchestrated sting operation that would catch Silas's people red-handed. "The handoff usually happens here." Rafe pointed to a spot on the map. "It's an old livestock transfer station on Route 47. Quiet, remote, perfect for their purposes. They disguise the illegal transfers as routine livestock movements. And that's where I come in? Blythe asked, studying the location. Rafe nodded. You'll be driving a decoy trailer. We need someone who knows how to handle livestock transport, someone they won't immediately suspect. Dr. Pritchard says you used to help with large animal transfers? My father taught me, Blythe confirmed. I've handled everything from horses to cattle. The trailer won't be a problem. Dr. Pritchard touched her arm. Are you sure about this, Blythe? It could be dangerous. I'm sure, Blythe said firmly. I need to see this through. For Marigold, for all the other animals they've exploited. The next 24 hours passed in a blur of preparation. Blythe checked and double-checked the supplies for Marigold and the puppies, making sure the generator was fueled and the heating lamps were secure. She showed Dr. Pritchard how to access the cellar in case anything happened to her during the operation. As evening approached the next day, Blythe found herself behind the wheel of a horse trailer, her heart pounding but her hands steady on the steering wheel. She was dressed the part, worn jeans, work boots, a baseball cap pulled low over her eyes. Just another livestock handler making a routine transfer. Rafe's voice crackled through the small earpiece she wore. State troopers are in position. Remember, your job is just to be visible. Give them something to watch while we move in. Don't engage directly. Copy that, she murmured, pulling into the transfer station. A few other trailers were already parked in the gravelled lot, their drivers lounging casually nearby. Blythe recognized one of them. He'd been at Silas's ranch the day she'd refused to hand over the puppies. She parked her trailer and stepped out, trying to project an air of bored routine. The man from Silas's ranch glanced at her, but showed no sign of recognition. Blythe leaned against her trailer, checking her phone as if waiting for instructions. The next few minutes seemed to stretch endlessly. Then she saw it. A refrigerated truck pulling in, the kind used for transporting temperature-sensitive veterinary supplies, or as they now knew, cryogenic containers of illegally harvested wolf embryos. Everything happened very fast after that. As the truck's rear doors opened, revealing stacks of containers marked as horse semen specimens, multiple vehicles suddenly converged on the lot. State troopers emerged with weapons drawn, ordering everyone to freeze. Blythe pressed herself against her trailer as chaos erupted. The man from Silas's ranch tried to run, but was quickly tackled. The driver of the refrigerated truck attempted to pull away, but was boxed in by police vehicles. Rafe appeared beside her, his badge visible on his belt. "Stay here," he ordered, moving to join the troopers who were securing the scene. Blythe watched as they began examining the containers from the truck, careful to maintain the proper temperature. "Got them!" one of the troopers called out. "Cryo canisters, just like we suspected, marked as equine genetic material, but look at these serial numbers. They match the pattern from the previous investigation." Blythe felt a surge of triumph as she watched the troopers carefully document and secure the evidence. Years of smuggling, countless animals exploited, and finally they had concrete proof. The containers would be tested, the embryos identified, and Silas's entire operation would be exposed. Several hours later, after giving her statement to the authorities, Blythe returned to check on Marigold and her puppies. The storm cellar was quiet and warm, the mother dog raising her head briefly to acknowledge Blythe's arrival before settling back with her babies. "We did it, girl," Blythe whispered, sitting beside the nest. "We really did it. They won't be able to hurt any more animals like they hurt you." Dr. Pritchard arrived shortly after, bringing fresh supplies and news from Rafe. "They've already confirmed some of the embryos are from red wolves," she reported. "Multiple generations of genetic materials, carefully preserved. The scope of this operation, it's staggering." "What happens now?" Blythe asked, watching as Marigold tended to her puppies. "Now we wait for the legal process to unfold." "Doctor," Pritchard replied, "the evidence is solid. The canisters, the documentation, the genetic testing. Combined with everything else we've uncovered, it should be enough to bring down Silas's entire network." Blythe nodded, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Relief that the truth was finally exposed, satisfaction at seeing justice in motion, but also a lingering concern. She knew from experience that victories like this were rarely simple or complete. Still, as she watched Marigold caring for her puppies in the safe haven of her mother's storm cellar, Blythe allowed herself to feel hopeful. They had struck a significant blow against those who would exploit and abuse innocent creatures for profit. For now, that would have to be enough. The victory was short-lived. Just 2 days after the sting operation, Blythe was checking on supplies at the local feed store when she felt something was wrong. The usually busy parking lot was empty, except for her truck and a dark SUV she didn't recognize. As she loaded bags of puppy food into her vehicle, the hairs on the back of her neck stood up. She heard footsteps on the gravel behind her. Before she could turn around, a cloth pressed against her face. The world went dark. When Blythe regained consciousness, her head was pounding. She found herself in what appeared to be an old barn, her wrists bound with zip ties to a metal chair. Through blurry vision, she made out hay bales, rusted farm equipment, and worse, one of the puppies from Marigold's litter whimpering in a small cage nearby. "Good morning, Miss Calder." The voice was smooth, cultured, completely at odds with the rough surroundings. Silas March stepped into view, impeccably dressed in an expensive suit despite the dusty environment. "I believe we need to have a conversation about some property of mine." Blythe's throat was dry, but she managed to speak. "Those puppies don't belong to you." "Neither does Marigold." "Now that's where you're wrong." Silas pulled up another chair, sitting down to face her. "I've invested considerable resources in developing that particular genetic line. Years of work, millions of dollars. Did you really think I would just walk away because of one failed sting operation?" The puppy in the cage whimpered again. It was one of the smaller ones, with distinctive white markings on its chest. Blythe's heart ached, seeing it confined alone, away from its mother and siblings. "What you're doing is wrong," Blythe said, trying to keep her voice steady. "These are living creatures, not laboratory experiments." "They're both," Silas replied coldly. "And they represent the future of species preservation, whether short-sighted conservationists want to admit it or not. Now, you're going to tell me where you've hidden the rest of the litter." Thunder rumbled outside. Through gaps in the barn's wooden walls, Blythe could see dark clouds gathering. The spring storm that had been threatening all day was finally arriving. "I won't tell you anything," she said firmly. Silas's pleasant expression didn't waver. "You will. Everyone breaks eventually. And I have time." He stood up, straightening his jacket. "I'll give you a while to think about your situation. Perhaps the sound of that puppy crying for its mother will help motivate you." He walked away, leaving Blythe alone with the distressed puppy. She could hear rain beginning to pound on the metal roof, growing heavier by the minute. Wind howled through the gaps in the walls. Hours passed. The storm intensified. Water began seeping under the barn doors, forming puddles on the dirt floor. The puppy was clearly terrified of the thunder, pressing itself against the bars of its cage. Blythe worked constantly at the zip ties, ignoring the way they cut into her wrists. The chair was old, slightly wobbly. If she could just get enough leverage. A massive thunderclap shook the entire structure. The puppy yelped in terror. At that moment, Blythe felt the chair leg give way slightly. She threw her weight sideways, and the rusted metal finally snapped. She fell hard, but managed to get her bound hands in front of her by pulling them under her legs. Working quickly, she used a jagged edge of the broken chair to saw through the zip ties. Her wrists were bleeding, but she barely noticed as she rushed to the puppy's cage. The lock was simple. She managed to work it open with trembling fingers. "It's okay, baby," she whispered, gathering the shaking puppy against her chest. "We're getting out of here." The storm was reaching its peak as Blythe peered out of the barn. The rain was coming down in sheets, and she could hear the roar of rising water nearby. Through the downpour, she could make out the lights of a road maybe half a mile away. Taking a deep breath, she pulled her jacket around the puppy and ran out into the storm. The wind nearly knocked her off her feet. Within seconds, she was soaked to the skin. The ground was turning into mud, making every step treacherous. Behind her she heard shouting. They'd discovered her escape. Blythe ran harder, holding the puppy tight. She splashed through deepening puddles, trying to keep her bearings in the darkness. The road had to lead somewhere. If she could just find help. Headlights appeared through the rain. For a moment, she felt hope. Then she recognized Silas's SUV. She veered off the road, scrambling down an embankment. Water was rushing past below. A drainage ditch turned into a raging stream by the storm. The puppy squirmed in her arms, crying. She tried to soothe it while searching desperately for a way across. The water was rising fast, debris rushing past in the current. She could hear engines, voices, flashlight beams cutting through the rain. Blythe spotted what looked like a culvert pipe spanning the water. It was meant to help control flooding, but now it was nearly submerged. Still, it might be her only chance. She started working her way across, trying to keep her footing on the slick surface. Halfway across, the puppy panicked. It twisted free of her grasp, falling toward the rushing water. Without thinking, Blythe dove after it. The cold shocked the breath from her lungs. The current grabbed her instantly, trying to pull her under. She managed to grab the puppy with one hand, her other hand catching on something, a root or branch protruding from the bank. The water pulled at them with frightening strength. "Hold on, baby," she gasped, trying to keep the puppy's head above water. Her fingers were going numb, her grip weakening. The roar of the water was deafening. This was it, she thought. After everything, this was how it would end. Then she heard someone calling her name. "Blythe! Hold on!" A familiar voice. Rafe, she couldn't see him through the rain and darkness, but she heard him getting closer. "Here!" She tried to shout, but it came out as barely more than a whisper. The puppy whimpered, pressed against her chest. Suddenly there were hands grabbing her, strong arms pulling her, and the puppy from the water's grip. She found herself on solid ground, coughing and shaking. The puppy was crying but alive, still clutched in her arms. "I've got you," Rafe was saying, his voice rough with emotion. "I've got you both." More voices approached, state troopers, federal agents. Someone wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. Through her daze, she heard fragments of conversation. They'd been tracking Silas, following leads, arrived just in time. "The other puppies?" she managed to ask. "Safe," Rafe assured her. "We've had the storm cellar under surveillance since the sting. Silas's men never got close." Blythe sagged with relief, holding the rescued puppy closer. They were alive, but she knew this wasn't over. Silas was still out there, and he wouldn't stop until he was forced to. The final confrontation was still to come. For now, though, she focused on the warmth slowly returning to her body, the feel of the puppy's heartbeat against hers, and the knowledge that they had survived this darkest moment together. Dawn broke over Silas March's property with steely determination. Blythe sat in Rafe's truck, her heart pounding as she watched federal agents take their positions around the sprawling foaling barn. Dr. Pritchard crouched nearby, a tranquilizer rifle at the ready. After everything they'd been through, it all came down to this moment. "Remember," Rafe said quietly beside her, "we have solid evidence and legal warrants. Stay behind me." Blythe nodded, though her hands trembled slightly. The image of those 15 innocent puppies kept her focused. They deserved justice. The raid began with military precision. Agents burst through the main doors while others covered the exits. Blythe followed Rafe inside, the smell of hay and horses filling her nose. At first, the barn seemed empty. Then movement caught her eye. Silas March stood by his office, feeding papers into a small trash barrel where flames were already dancing. His face twisted with rage when he saw them. "This is private property," he shouted, continuing to destroy documents. "Federal warrant," Rafe announced, his voice steady. "Step away from the fire, Mr. March." Instead of complying, Silas kicked over the barrel and ran toward the grain storage area. Papers scattered, some still burning. Blythe rushed to stamp out the flames while Rafe pursued Silas. The sound of hoofbeats made her look up. Through the barn's far doors, she saw Cobb, Doctor, Pritchard's ex-husband, galloping away on one of Silas's prize horses. Her heart sank, thinking he might escape, until she heard the distinctive pop of Dr. Pritchard's tranquilizer rifle. The horse continued running, but Cobb swayed and then toppled sideways into a hay bale. Dr. Pritchard's aim had been perfect. Meanwhile, Blythe heard commotion from the grain storage area. She ran toward it, finding Rafe searching frantically while Silas was nowhere in sight. The massive steel bins loomed above them. "He's trying to hide something in the grain," Rafe said. "But I can't tell which bin." Blythe's eyes went to the control panel for the automated feed system. Years of working with farm equipment gave her an idea. "The feed chute," she said. "If he's in one of the bins, I can trap him." She ran to the panel and activated the system. The mechanical whir of augers filled the air. One by one, she opened the chutes between bins until a muffled curse gave away Silas's location. "Bin 3, she called to Rafe. "And he's not getting out unless he wants to ride the feed conveyor down." Rafe and 2 agents quickly secured the bin's exterior ladder. When they opened the top hatch, they found Silas thigh-deep in grain, clutching a waterproof case full of documents and USB drives, evidence he'd failed to destroy. "Game over, March," Rafe said as they helped him out in handcuffs. The trial that followed was swift and decisive. The evidence was overwhelming. Financial records, genetic test results, veterinary documents showing the illegal breeding program. Both Silas March and James Cobb were convicted on multiple federal charges. But for Blythe, the real victory came when the judge ruled on the fate of Marigold's puppies. Thanks to testimony from wildlife experts and Dr. Pritchard, they would be spared euthanasia. Instead, they would go to a special sanctuary that worked with wolf-dog hybrids, where they could live safely away from humans who might exploit them. Standing outside the courthouse after the verdict, Blythe felt lighter than she had in weeks. Dr. Pritchard approached her with a warm smile. "I've been thinking," the older woman said. "The clinic needs rebuilding after the fire. When it reopens, I'd like you to consider a new position, Director of Animal Protection Services. We need someone who'll fight for the animals who can't fight for themselves." Tears welled in Blythe's eyes. She wasn't just a nurse anymore. She had become something more, a protector, an advocate, someone who stood up against cruelty no matter the cost. "I'd be honored," she said softly. Rafe joined them, resting a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You've earned it," he said. "You showed more courage than any of us." Blythe looked between them, feeling profound gratitude. She had found her true calling, surrounded by people who shared her dedication to protecting the innocent. The path ahead was clear now. She would help build something better from the ashes of what they'd overcome. Thanks for watching. If any part of this story lingered with you, consider subscribing. I'll be here again tomorrow, sharing another tale that speaks to the soul.